I think one of my colleagues was raising this question with you earlier on, and I want to take it slightly further. Is it Tibeti or Matibeti, the business, the person?
Matibeti.
Matibeti. The party that I want to ask you to comment on generally is the one that, because I think you had said earlier on, after the quarrel between you and him and the court challenges or proceedings that have taken place, you started getting some people from or who are associated with this company raising all sorts of things about the way in which business is being conducted, which is not proper and in line with our laws. How do we explain, or how do you understand, but how do we explain as well the seeming coincidence that at the time when he's on a toe-to-toe with you legally, and then people start saying things that were never said to you before you had a fight with him? What could be the reason for that?
Well, I think people maybe realize that they might have been afraid to come out until they realize that someone who's not afraid of Matibeti, then they feel free. I had said that the man is closer to Getsemane, the taxi, one of the taxi bosses in KZN. Getsemane had issues with me. He still has, I believe. He has taken the police to court. He have gone to social media, podcast, and said all sorts of things about me. But I've never had anyone coming to me and say, here's something we have against Getsemane that must lead into a case. So there's no investigation that we have ever lodged against Getsemane, despite of what he had said, of how he has behaved. So this is just to indicate that I'm not going all out to target a person. He's not a person that I target. That's why when I want to talk to him, I'll call him that I want to talk to you, because I don't have issues with him. Despite of how he feels about me and the SAPS, but that's him. So Matibet did the same thing. The fact that there's investigations happening is because evidence now comes before me. Before that, I'm sure people didn't even know me. That's why they didn't raise those things. Because when I looked at how old are these things that they are raising, some of them a couple of years old, and I asked, but why these things were not spoken? They said, no, we are afraid of this man. We thought he's that powerful, he controls everything. Until we see someone that can challenge him, that's why we feel that we must come to you.
You know, General, since for the past 6 months, since we started with the ad hoc committee, and I think with developments at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, I suppose the country knows a lot now, more than what we knew before then. I'm just saying, during the lifespan of the ad hoc committee, the proceedings here and the proceedings in the Commission of Inquiry, I think people are much more educated about many things that are going on. Of course, some of them are yet to be verified, yet to be confirmed. Some of them might end in court. But I would imagine that to a very larger extent, the revelations that have been playing out in the public domain on their own should serve as a deterrent in terms of other police officers or anybody else in society engaging in the wrong activities similar to what we're dealing with. But I just want to know, and of course, more and above that, being a deterrent on its own, the quality of the corrective measures that we should take as Parliament and the Executive should add even a much more important weight in avoiding the recurrence of the same or similar situation in the future. But how much of what we have learned over these proceedings was well known already to somebody like you?
And there's well, I would say 50-50, but there's quite a lot of things that has come to the fore that I was not aware of as a police officer myself. There's other information that came to me that has not gone to both of these structures that have been established that I became aware of, such as what we spoke about Matibeti as an example. information of corruption that we start hearing about, that we otherwise I would have known or would not have known about it. But in the sense of it, then I realize that it's across the board. And the people that are mostly in the forefront of the wrong that's happening, especially outside the police, is involving procurement issues of government. There's a lot of corruption happening in there. The people are coming forward and exposing it. And the unfortunate part is that we have decided that certain level of corruption must only be investigated by the Hawks. So even if I'm aware of it, I must now pass it to the Hawks. And then when you pass it, you don't know what happens from there onward. And that's the only unfortunate part that happens. But by and large, the things are coming up. And we are getting information about things happening in other provinces. And then when you engage people, say, but go to the police station, open a case, and they will tell you, no, this one will go nowhere. And they'll come with some reasons as to why. And it kind of frustrates you. But that makes me realize that there's more problems that we have that otherwise are not known that we must start looking at, that the government must start looking at.
How do you suggest we deal with that, just that concern you have, that now things must be referred to the Hawks? If they are not referred to the Hawks, what else should be done? Because that may also have to do with the kind of legislation that we may have to propose at the end of our work. I'm hearing you saying something pops up and then you must refer it to the Hawks, and I get a sense that you are frustrated by that referral.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the investigation reforms that need to have, and I'm going to invite you to take the legislation that established IDEC, that's NPA legislation. Look at what you're intending to achieve with it as government. Look at the legislation that amended the functioning of the SAPS in the establishment of the Hawks, and check what is it that the government intending to achieve with it, and then versus the South African Police Service. These are all three levels now established in the country to investigate cases. And how then you separate as a legislator, how do you separate who must do what in all these three investigating arms of our security cluster now? So if legislature takes that, because there's legislation that governs all this, then you go and look at the SOPs then that are developed amongst these three institutions. One of them is how does IDEC take cases, who classify cases between, DPCI, who classify cases of DPCI versus the one that are dealt with in the South African Police Service separately, a normal detective service within the SAPS. And what type of case then goes to IDEC versus that which is at DPCI. So when you start looking at that and see whether there is no abuse of the system in between, does each one achieve the objective of creating a safer environment in the Republic without being frustrated by the other one? If the case lands on this one's table, that belongs into other body, how does this case moves over? Is it the senior body that comes and takes it, or is it the junior body that transfer it to the other structures? So what are the rules that are put out there? So I think we might want to investigate the cross-referencing of these three so that we're able to align it properly in terms of legislation. But in the center of all this, you have one police station that must service all the three. In the center of all this, we have one provincial commissioner that constitutionally is overseeing all these operations in the province. To what extent does this provincial commissioner have a say over what IDEC does, over what DPCI does? So those are the gaps that may need to be looked at so that you're able to close them.
I just want to go back to the question I asked earlier on and about the knowledge that you have, and you are saying 50-50 in terms of now looking back now, Commissioner, if the 31st of December did not arrive in the context of the letter from the minister. Now, looking back, I know it has arrived, but let's imagine it did not. And you know almost 50% or something like that, even if it was 20% of the information that has now been displayed in the public domain. What were you going to do with it, or what were you going to do with it, or what do you think you should have done with it in an event where the 31st of December did not arrive? Not as a date, but in context, as that letter which has triggered all that has evolved up to the July press conference.
I must indicate that we have been operating, identifying some challenges, but the limitation that we had was to address those internal within the structures. Make recommendation of this, make recommendation of that. It is taken, it's not taken, and you leave it. But you see the problems, but you have a limitation in terms of addressing them. The level of involvement of senior police officers in criminality, it's something that we did not necessarily have any concrete evidence on. We will suspect. That's why I say there are colleagues that have begun to question their lifestyle. But we're not necessarily conducting that lifestyle audit. And I kept on talking about it. You can see that this one looks like he's living large. And we don't know where he gets the money from. But nothing has been done. We therefore couldn't necessarily investigate anything going forward. We'll just leave it like that. But I think the events that took place, that was informed by the letter, has brought into light some of these lifestyles of these generals. Only then you get to realize, oh, this is where this thing comes from. Typical example, I was one of the people invited by Jairus Beer when he got promoted to come and celebrate with him, because we're not friends. And I thought, why must I go and celebrate his promotion? We're not friends. I'm not going there. They went there. Oh Lord, Gerald Kumar was there as well. I don't know if Machala was there. Probably was there. There were a lot of them that were invited. And subsequently that there would have been other parties. But I don't think at the time anyone thought of anything about Sbia. I must be honest. He was a very flashy guy when he worked for the Hawks before. I was in a task force, and you could observe. Every time this heist task force was in the forefront on those heists, I would be there when they come to attend those crime scenes. And he will come there. Very fancy person with fancy suits, like those people that goes to these modern churches. He was always flashy. But I couldn't connect as to what makes him to look like that. So now that we know what we know now, then you then say, but we saw these things back then. But we didn't necessarily dig to establish. So this has assisted us to say, when we suspect something, we then have to start probing. And part of what we then should do is these lifestyle audits that we are complaining about, we have to be very strict about, because maybe they might reveal things while it's still early that will help us going forward. You can't have a person who, like has been already revealed, you are building a R1 million house in one spot. At the same time, you're building another R1 million house somewhere else. Who are you? Where do you get the money from? And you're driving a fancy car. So there are many signs that we might have neglected as management of the police that we saw, that we should have paid attention on. So I feel the way we're doing in terms of complaining, it's all what we could do, but there was limitation on that. Investigate when the information comes before you, but even that investigation doesn't take you far. But that's all we could do at the time.
No, thanks, Chair. I'm left with just two questions now. The last one, I'm going to be following up on your observation that part of the frustration is that things are being raised with the relevant authorities in terms of what needs to be done to to deal with problems within the police, and they are not acted upon. I'm going to come back on that issue because there is a matter I want to raise in relation to your boss, the National Commissioner, exactly around that issue. But I want to start with this one, which is I'm saying is the one before last. The cartel and the Big Five. Whether they are going to be confirmed at whatever point, who are they, but how do we defeat them? Because these are people that we have to defeat, given what we are told they are engaged on. From what we have heard, there is nothing that they are involved in which has got to do with our national interest. It's more about self-preservation and about their own personal interest, the advancements of those. How do we defeat them? Because at some point, we can't allow a group like that. We've got to find a way to defeat it.
Honourable members, there are a few things that they're involved in. And I feel the other two are something that maybe we might want to do something easy. I don't know about the third one, which might be a bit complicated. The third one, maybe if I might start with it, is the tenders of government. The process of how these tenders are issued and stuff like that is something that government must look at. Once a person is spoiled of always getting tenders every other place where they apply for, and they become rich, it becomes clear that for them getting these tenders is not because of exceptional things that they do that justifies it, but it's the connections they have, or maybe the envelopes that are crossing floors that leads into them getting these tenders. But that's a difficult part to address because it does not only involve the cartel squad, but majority of business people that are involved in tenders. They are benefiting from that or even affected by it. The other two environments that are more of a problem, and the second one in my list of priorities is cash in transit heist. And I would wish government can come up with a policy once and for all that's going to regulate the movements of money in the country. That is going to regulate the cash, the utilization of cash in our country. The lesser we use cash, the better. And I don't want to hear anyone telling me that in the rural areas there's no connectivities. People in the rural areas have got phones. If they can talk on the phone, that means they can pay on the phone. So I'm not saying totally you can get rid of cash. There's always going to be cash there. Not everyone else has got a bank account. There will be cash. But limit that to the most vulnerable areas where there's not large sum of cash is used. In the urban areas, here where we at in Cape Town, we just have no reason to pay cash in any of the shop in the Mokarong. There's not poor people that stays here. Yes, there are people sleeping on the street, but you and me can afford to pay with a card. So the moment you start introducing that, there's going to be less amount of cash that must be picked up here. A vehicle drives in the morning to come and load up ATMs. Vehicle drive in the morning and come and pick up money from the shops because we bought cash. So they have these in their drop safes. They must give it to these companies to go and bank them. So that's the second part in terms of cash in transit. And one of them, when you regulate the movement, we have suggested some typical examples that if the money is in the bag, that bag is taken from the shop to the car, or the money is in the car and this car is driving from point A to point B, there must be mandatory, at least, devices that are put into that vehicle so that there will be a robber. The moment he interferes with that truck, with that money is destroyed, cannot be used. A lot of things been tried. Ink is put into the paper. They take this paper with the ink, they get chemicals, they dump this money in the bucket overnight. The following day, that chemical is gone. They take the money and go and gamble with it. So if you can't use the money gets destroyed. There won't be need for you to even bomb the car. And explosives is a dangerous thing. So these criminals, they use it recklessly. and they're part of these drug dealers, this cartel, because it's easy money. So they blast these cars with the inside job, because they don't blast an empty car. People within, they will tell them this car has got so much money. Either the companies themselves or the clients where they pick up the money from will tell you, we've put so much money into this car, as it moves, get it. And they're going to get it on the road. And that increases the risk to society. It makes our country look like we're at war zone, because there's bombing everywhere on this cash in transit. So the reforms on cash in transit and the use of cash in our country, I think is very urgent, especially on transportation of money, very urgent, something that government must look at. The last one and most important one, our borders. If we don't do anything about the control on the movement of our borders, we're not going to stop these drugs. Regardless of what we do with the cartel, we will not stop the drugs. I said when I presented that it is not only the big five that we have a problem with. They happen to be closer to the government officials, senior government officials, and take control of the entire security cluster. These five. But there's big dogs out there that are sitting and smiling. That are making billions of friends on bringing these drugs into the country and packaging them and reselling them. So until we control our borders, a typical example, police officers we have in the borders, they've been there for ages. The employment condition of a police officer is not easy for you to say you are here on a contract for 1 year and after 1 year you must move. We go through all the labor process to try and remove a person after we've placed a person in one spot, because there's no flexibility in terms of our labor laws, employment condition in the police. It must be looked at. That it doesn't matter how good I might be about KZN, but the moment I'm so used to the port of entry on Durban and I'm so immense into corruption, whether it's taxis, whether it's CITs, whether it's stock theft, whatever it is, I might need to move from that province and go to another province. Take me and say, now go to Limpopo. You become a provincial commissioner and see you can do what you're doing here as a civil servant. But we don't do that. We become so used to the environment where we're working, and then the criminality then start cropping in, because these criminals either threaten us or they're going to bribe us. Either way. So that's what we see happening in the borders. And I must say, it's not only the police in the border. Almost everyone that works there gets involved with the syndicate. From all different departments, different entities in the border, they get involved with syndicates that are working there. So unless we do something about those border controls, we're not going to stop this. So that is the number one priority for me on the borders. Cash in transit, secondly, and the third one, we must start looking at the tenders. That's how we're going to stop this cartel. If we don't do that, you close the borders, they have cash in transit highs. You close that, they still run tenders because they're controlling some of the procurements that are happening, and they still enjoy life.